Have you ever stopped to wonder why some nations, they rise to these incredible heights of prosperity and influence, while others just seem to fade or even disappear completely? It's a huge question, right? Philosophers, historians, leaders, they've all wrestled with it for centuries. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources and really try to unpack the most profound insights. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating text. It's from a very specific, very intense moment in history, a speech given in 1947, just months before the partition of India. It's called Nations Rise and Fall, WY, by Maulana Sayyid Abul Maududi.
And that context is crucial. 1947, India on the brink of partition. The author himself paints a picture saying the entire East Punjab had turned into a raging volcano about to explode shortly with all its fury. Intense times.
Absolutely. So he's offering this perspective on what shapes the destiny of nations. And it's not just politics or economics. He talks about universal, unchanging laws.
Kind of like laws of nature almost.
Exactly. Prepare for maybe an aha moment as we explore what he calls the divine law of the rise and fall of nations. We'll dig into what that means for how we understand history and maybe even our own actions today.
So, the author's core idea, his main premise, is pretty straightforward. He says the rise and fall of nations isn't, random. It's not whimsical. It's actually governed by, and these are his words, permanent laws, firm regulations, and fixed rules.
Permanent laws, like laws of physics.
That's the analogy he uses. Just like the sun, the moon, our bodies follow God's laws. Breathing, heart beating, he argues that history does too. The ups and downs of our history, our rise and fall, our progress or decay, they all follow these rules. You can't just ignore them.
You can't make fire cold, as he puts it. So it's not just about human choices or luck.
Not entirely, no.
Yeah.
There are these overarching divine rules applied impartially that set the stage. And the most important clause of this divine law, it's actually quite simple. Construction pleases God, destruction displeases him.
Okay, construction versus destruction. That's the foundation.
That's the bedrock. Nations are essentially chosen, selected for management of the affairs of the world based on their constructive abilities, how much good they build versus how much they tear down.
That's quite different from how we usually talk about geopolitics, isn't it? It's less about power projection and more about a kind of moral balance sheet.
Exactly. He says nations hold on to power until the time their deeds of construction outweigh their deeds of destruction.
But there's a tipping point.
Right. Once that balance shifts too far towards destruction, they're removed. And another nation gets a chance under the exact same condition. It's a continuous process.
Okay, that's a big concept. How does he make it more concrete?
He uses this brilliant analogy. Think of a garden owner and a gardener.
Okay.
A good gardener, someone who cultivates, improves the soil, clears weeds, maybe even introduces new useful plants that gardener pleases the owner, right?
Yeah.
And probably gets promoted, more responsibility.
Makes sense. And the opposite.
Well, an unskilled as well as work shirker gardener, someone who lets the garden go to ruin, causes damage, allows weeds and filth to take over, the gardener gets fired.
Right. Doesn't matter who recommended them or if their father was the gardener before them.
Precisely. No recommendation, no supplication, no hereditary claim matters if they keep desolating the garden, as he puts it.
So how does that connect back to nations?
Just like that garden owner cares about their property, God, the real master of the world, in Maududi's terms, isn't indifferent to how nations manage the earth, this vast expanse of land given to them.
Okay. So the world is the garden and nations are the gardeners.
That's the idea. And this leads to a key distinction he makes between the divine outlook and the human outlook.
How so?
Humans, we often talk about hereditary rights, this is our motherland, our ancestors lived here for generations, nationalistic claims.
Yeah, very common.
But God, according to the author, does not recognize these nationalistic claims. What matters is the nation's actual performance. Are they building things up? Are they doing good? Reform and construction, uprooting evils and cultivating virtues.
So it's purely merit-based in a cosmic sense, not based on identity.
That's the argument. And if a nation starts becoming destructive, turns bad, God doesn't just immediately kick them out. First, there are warnings, mild shocks, then maybe severe jolts, like reminders to get back on track.
But if they don't listen...
If they don't heed the warnings, then they're dispossessed, they lose their stewardship. And a new group, a new nation, the ones who show the greatest ability for doing good and the lesser inclination towards causing devastation, they're given charge.
Wow. So the land ultimately belongs to God, not to any specific people by right of birth.
That's the core message. The land belongs exclusively to God. The gardener analogy really drives that home, I think.
It does. Okay, so this is the theory, the divine law. How did Maududi see this playing out in actual history? He focuses on India, right?
Yes, he uses India's history as a kind of case study to demonstrate his theory in action. It's fascinating how he applies this universal principle to specific shifts in power there.
Where does he start?
He starts way back with the Aryans. He suggests they were appointed, so to speak, when the creative capabilities of the original inhabitants were spent. The Aryans then came in and founded a glorious civilization. They developed sciences, arts, explored resources. Basically, their construction outweighed their destruction for a long time.
But then, the inevitable decline.
According to Maududi, yes.
Yeah.
They eventually set upon the evil course and began to degenerate, morally degraded. He points specifically to things like the caste system, creating these deep divisions, subjecting millions to hideous persecution. He uses the example of untouchability.
And hoarding knowledge, too.
Yeah, he has this striking image of pundits sat over the treasures of knowledge coiled like snakes. Instead of sharing and building, they hoarded. It became oppressive, destructive. And so their time ended.
Okay, then who came next in his analysis?
Then came the period of Muslim rule over India, which lasted for several centuries. And during their constructive phase, he credits them with spreading knowledge, bringing reforms in culture, establishing a justice system that was, for its time, far superior.
But again, the pattern repeats.
It seems so, in his view. Eventually, they too began to degenerate. Destructive tendencies crept in. He mentions things like creating their own social gradations, racial discrimination starting to appear, justice turning into oppression.
And that phrase about becoming indolent and steeped in love of ease and pleasure.
Yes, and that really vivid detail about princes being too weak to run for their lives because they'd given up walking on the earth. It paints a picture of extreme decay, doesn't it?
It really does, and the moral decline.
He points to the rise of mercenary soldiers, ready to switch allegiance for a bit of money. A disgraceful profession, he calls it, even noting that the famous poet Velib apparently boasted about it. It showed a loss of principle, a focus on pure self-interest.
So, according to this framework, when Muslim rule reached that low point, India's administration was essentially, what, vacant?
That's exactly his term, vacant, ripe for a new gardener, if you will. And this is where the British enter the picture. Maududi, trying to be impartial, he says, argues that the British, despite their own flaws, did possess certain constructive capabilities at that time.
Yeah.
Capabilities that their rivals, he mentions the Marathas, Sikhs, some Muslim nobles, seemed to lack in comparison.
So even with their own issues, their constructive side outweighed their destructive side compared to the alternatives at that moment.
That's his assessment. He says their virtues would outnumber their faults in comparison to the others vying for power then. For Maududi, this was the divine law working again. God decides in favor of those who would, on the whole, establish an equitable and just rule, and it doesn't matter about race or nationality or who was there before.
He even quotes the Qur'an here, right?
Yes. Thou givest dominion to whomsoever thou willst, and takest away the same from whomsoever thou likest. It reinforces that idea of divine appointment based on performance, not claims.
And he acknowledges British achievement.
Oh, yes. He notes that despite being few in number, they were effective at using India's resources and people to achieve significant constructive achievements, like reforms, building infrastructure perhaps, things that he felt the native powers weren't managing at the time.
Okay, but then we get to 1947. What happened to the British constructive phase?
Well, by 1947, Maududi argues the British had hit their limit. Their creative achievements were done. Now, their deeds of destruction were piling up, becoming alarmingly heavy. They were causing, in his view, havoc rather than do some good to India.
So the balance tipped against them, too.
Exactly. And he says the divine will was set for them to be expelled in disgrace by violent means if they hadn't actually chosen to leave when they did.
Wow. Okay, so that leads us right up to that moment in 1947, the time of the speech itself. Independence is coming.
Right. And this is where he issues a really stark warning. He says this transfer of power isn't some kind of permanent reward, not an automatic restitution to the native.
It's more like a test.
Precisely. He calls it a probationary period.
And the candidates for this test are?
Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs. As the older inhabitants, they're getting the first chance to rule themselves again.
But there's a condition, obviously.
A huge condition. If they can show they're capable of doing more good than evil, more construction than destruction, then their rule might become permanent. But if they demolish more than they can build, he warns, They will soon witness their eviction from power, and God will choose some other nation from far or near.
That puts enormous pressure on them. So what was his assessment? How did he see the moral state of these candidates right then on the verge of taking power?
Well, it's pretty devastating, frankly. He delivers this really scathing critique. He estimates that hardly 5% of the population are immune from moral decay, meaning basically 95% are suffering from it.
95%, that's incredibly high.
It's a shocking figure. And he says that this epidemic affected everyone: Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, even the Harijans, the untouchable community. Nobody was spared, in his view.
What kind of decay is he talking about? What were the symptoms?
On an individual level, he lists things like widespread corruption, usurping people's rights, making money unlawfully, telling lies for convenience, dishonesty in general, deceit in business, hoarding goods, exploiting people during famine. A whole catalog of failings.
Okay, so individual moral failures. But how did that translate collectively?
He argues this individual decay created an epidemic of terrible collective behavior. The most horrific examples he gives are the communal riots happening then, like in Calcutta. He doesn't mince words. He talks about people showing wickedness, baseness, beastliness, and cruelty.
And the details he provides are harrowing.
They really are. I mean, he mentions infants being butchered, people assaulted publicly, houses of worship desecrated, the sick and elderly attacked, passengers thrown from trains, limbs hacked off living people. Just brutal, inhuman violence.
And even the authorities got involved.
That's perhaps the most damning part. He says the police, army, and the judicial magistrates, the very people meant to keep order, were sometimes openly joining the communal riots. A complete breakdown of institutions.
Where did he think all this hatred and violence came from?
He blames the leaders. He says they produced this poisonous crop by inciting people with incendiary speeches and writings, making them fight like dogs and wolves. Truth and justice, he says, were reduced to an object of scorn.
So, facing this grim picture, he puts a question to his audience.
Yeah, a really challenging one. He asks them directly. Looking at this black picture of your deeds, vices, and crimes, does your conscience really think God will consider you worthy? Worthy of trust, worthy of having the administration transferred into your hands?
That's incredibly blunt, especially at a moment that should have been triumphant, achieving independence.
It's a stark reality check.
So, given this incredibly bleak assessment, does he offer any way forward? Any hope at all?
He does offer, as he puts it, a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that small percentage.
The 5%.
Exactly. The 5% of people who are immune from the evil infection. The hope lies with them.
Okay, so what should they do? What's the first step?
Organization. He calls for the organization of the righteous elements. His point is that evil is often organized, methodical. But good people, righteous people, tend to be scattered, disorganized.
So they need to band together.
Yes. Mutual cooperation and coordination. He has this belief that deep down, human nature abhors wickedness, that the inborn virtue of goodness can't be totally stamped out. And because of that, he argues, even a small but well-organized group of God-fearing people can actually overcome a much larger but disorganized force of evil.
Because goodness is inherently stronger.
That's his conviction. In this combat, evil can never dominate virtue. Truth, piety, honesty. These will win out in the end if they are organized and active.
Okay, so organization is step one. What's step two?
Step two is having a clear concept of good and evil, knowing what you're fighting against and what you're fighting for. He identifies 4 main elements causing deterioration, the things that lead to destruction.
What are they?
First, a lack of God consciousness. Basically, forgetting accountability to a higher power, which he believes leads directly to injustice, tyranny, corruption. Second, indifference to divine guidance. This means losing that fixed moral compass, letting self-interest, pleasure, expediency take over, leads to unscrupulous behavior.
Makes sense. What's third?
Third is selfishness. Not just individual selfishness, but collective selfishness, like extreme nationalism, racial prejudice, class divisions, things that cause people to violate the rights of others.
Okay. And the fourth?
Fourth is either inactiveness or licentiousness. It's twofold. Either failing to use the abilities and resources God gave you for good, or actively using them for bad, for unlawful, harmful purposes. Both lead to ruin, either being removed from power or self-destructing.
So those are the causes of decay. What about the positive side, the elements of reform?
They're essentially the direct opposites. The making, as he calls it. First, fear of God. Not terror, But that sense of awe and accountability, he sees it as the only reliable guarantee against doing evil, the thing that fosters truth, justice, trustworthiness.
So it's an internal motivator for good.
Exactly. Second, obedience to the divine guidance. This provides that permanent moral framework where fairness and justice rule, not just what's convenient or self-serving. Third, the right way to organize society. It must be built on equal status and equal rights for everyone. No unreasonable distinctions, no casteism, no artificial prejudice. It should embrace the entire human race on a footing of equality.
A universal brotherhood, basically.
That's the ideal. And finally, fourth, righteous actions. Simply putting those God-given capabilities and resources to their best, most constructive use for the benefit of all.
So it's a comprehensive plan. Organize the good people, understand clearly what constitutes good and evil, and then act accordingly.
Pretty much. He concludes with this urgent call to action. Form an organization of righteous persons immediately. Their job, to eradicate the causes of destruction and devise means of construction.
And the stakes are high.
Extremely. If they succeed, he believes, God will uphold their rule. If they fail, well, he leaves it open. But the implication is clear. Eviction, replacement, an unknown fate.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back from the specifics of 1947 India, this deep dive has really shown us a powerful, maybe provocative argument that the fate of nations isn't just about power politics or economics or, historical accident. It's governed by this consistent, universal, divine law.
Yeah, based fundamentally on whether their collective actions lead towards construction or towards destruction. It really reframes history as a kind of ongoing moral ledger.
That garden analogy keeps coming back to me. Nations, as gardeners tending this precious world, always under the watchful eye of the owner.
A strong image.
So Maududi delivered this in 1947, urging a nation on the brink of self-rule to look hard at its moral foundations and choose construction. But thinking about it now, what does this idea of a probationary test and the divine law itself suggest about the test that maybe all nations, all societies are always under, even today?
That's the lingering question, isn't it? Does this framework still apply? Are we still being judged collectively on whether we build more than we destroy?
And what does it mean for each of us individually? For your role listening now in the construction or destruction happening in the world around you, definitely something to mull over. Until our next deep dive.